Shabbat Shalom. One of the perks of having been here as a rabbi for so many years is that eventually I was bound to get a couple of fans, right? And these fans once in a while write me emails. And the emails get stronger the more I defend Israel. A couple of these people write to tell me why there's so much anti-Semitism in the world. And one of them in particular loves to tell me that the reason why there's so much anti-Semitism is because of the way Israel acts. And I was responding to these emails until a couple of months ago when I realized there's a block feature on my email server, and I don't ever have to see them again. But I started thinking, especially after what happened last week, how many Jews actually think that anti-Semitism is a consequence of Israel's actions? You know, this will be the equivalent of saying that a woman gets raped because she's wearing skimpy clothing. And I mean that with a lot of seriousness. And I know it's a horrible thing to say, but it's the equivalent. The reason I want to say to my fans, there's a state of Israel, is because of anti-Semitism. Before the Shoah, there was no state of Israel. And boy, did we have anti-Semitism. So, some of these arguments make absolutely no sense. And I realized that the more I try to respond, the more I perpetuate these people writing me. So I blocked them. And I want to talk to you this morning about choices. Because our Torah portion is clear about what happens in life. Re'eh anochi noten lifneichem hayom bracha uklala. Today, God says, I set before you a blessing and a curse. And the reason why the word today is inserted there is so that we know that every day we have choices to make. Every day we choose between blessing and curses. And the ultimate responsibility for those choices is ours alone. God warns us of the consequences. But we know that the choices belong ultimately in our hands. One mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. An avera leads to another avera. You know that's in the Pirkei Avot. When you do something good, you generally do something else that's good. When you do something bad, you generally go down a path of doing another thing that's bad. So one choice really leads to another. And eventually, we get ourselves spiraling down or up in the chain of choices that we make that ultimately change our lives. The majority of us want to think of our lives as modeled by the big choices that we make, right? Who we fall in love with, who we end up marrying, what we choose to eat, the diet that we follow, what we say. But the truth is that what really shapes our lives are the everyday small choices the Torah warns us about. Because those small choices eventually put together lead to enormous consequences. And because we think there are no consequences, they just pile up. I remember when I stood up here and I said, we have to watch out for the squad. And I remember the answer, oh, Rabbi, there's only 3 people. Who cares? There's 3 people. They're idiots. Nobody listens to them. Well, here we are today. Perhaps at the most dangerous inflection point our people have faced in their history in the United States of America. So don't tell me that the members of the squad don't matter. Don't tell me there's only 3 of them. Just like don't tell me ever that the anti-Semites on the far right are inconsequential either. We have to be very careful. What happened in Michigan last week is something that cannot be dismissed. I already hear people trying to justify it. Jews trying to justify it. Well, he said those things, but we really, look at the policies. The policies are good. Really, the policies are good? I'm not going to get into that. I don't speak about policies. But trust me, I come from a third world country. And I can tell you the policies are not good. Trust me on that one. But beyond that, to say that the anti-Semitic rhetoric that al-Sayed espoused throughout his campaign doesn't really matter anymore and we all have to come together? What on earth are we thinking? And to have Jewish politicians embracing this mamzer, what on earth is going on? I am really bewildered. This is a guy who, when asked if the state of Israel had a right to exist, he said he struggles with that question. Just think about this for a second. By the way, this weekend, we observed the second yahrzeit of the 6 young men and women that were murdered in the Hamas tunnels in Gaza on the Rafah. Carmel Gat, Eden Yerushalmi, Hersh Goldberg-Polin, Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sarusi, and Ori Danino. All taken at the prime of their lives, submerged in that nightmare of darkness by Hamas in Gaza. And then after surviving 11 months, cowardly murdered because the soldiers of the IDF were getting close. So they just shot them in the back. Look, I don't have to tell you that for 2,000 years, Jews were expelled, tortured, ostracized, scorned. That for 2,000 years, never one country worried about bringing Jewish bodies back after they had been executed by their enemies. Hersh's body and the other 5 hostages, they were brought back to Israel for proper burial, to give them their dignity, to give them their story back, to give them their voice back, and to let their mothers and their fathers cry for them. And the only reason we could do that is because Jewish soldiers went into those tunnels and recovered those bodies. And remember this well. Hersh was a citizen of the most powerful country on earth. And in spite of his parents pleading, it was not anyone from this government that brought him back. It was our children dressed in green that brought him back for burial. Let us not forget that. This week in Israel, we also witnessed another burial. The grandparents of Theodor Herzl, Shimon Lev and Rivka Herzl, were brought from their resting place in Serbia to our Herzl to be buried in Jerusalem. Now, quickly, on the side, what were those bodies doing in Serbia? Well, they belonged to a community called Zemun that back in the old days was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that's where they were buried. By the way, Shimon Lev was a Baal Tekiah in the congregation of Rabbi Alkalai, who was, by the way, one of the greatest Zionists in religious Zionism. So it is not inconsequential that after all these years, these bodies are also brought back to Israel. Now, ironically, the idea that a state is there for us to be buried as Jews is very valid. But ironically, that's not what Herzl intended. His intention was that the country should be there for us to live as Jews, not to die and be buried as Jews. And by the way, this is a concept that our rabbis understood over 2,000 years ago. The Sifrei in the Devarim has a story, a powerful story. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betira and 3 other rabbis are standing at the border of the land of Israel. They're leaving. And they suddenly look back and they start crying and they realize they cannot leave. And they rend their garments. And they say, the day we leave this land, it'll be like a living dead. That's what our Torah portion says. That we will inherit the land, and we will be in the land, and we will grow in the land. Yeshivat Eretz Israel, the Sifrei says, the dwelling in the land of Israel, shkula keneged kol mitzvot, is equivalent to all of the mitzvot in the Torah. So it doesn't matter if you're religious or not, if you're secular. By living in the land of Israel, according to Sifrei Deuteronomy, you are fulfilling all of the mitzvot in one single blow. Israel exists not so that we can be buried there. Unfortunately, this is our story. But it exists so that babies can be born, Jewish babies can be born in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Beersheba, in Ashdod, in Ashkelon, in Eilat. Israel exists so that our children can speak the language of Isaiah and Jeremiah and eat pizza at the same time. Israel exists so that our scientists can bless the world with discoveries and our musicians can write new music and melodies of life. Israel exists so that Hebrew is not the language that we use for prayer, but the language that we use to speak to one another on a daily basis. You know, standing in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, we went to the Jewish cemetery. You cannot fit a single more body in that cemetery. So somebody asked a very innocent question, why don't you get another one? And one of these Jews looks at us and says, we don't want to die here. We don't want to leave our lives here. We want to go to Israel. We don't want to buy more land in Ethiopia. This is who we are as a people. No matter how bad things are, no matter how poor we are, no matter how dispossessed we are, like those Jews that I met in Addis Ababa, we never stop dreaming about Israel. So yes, Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. Just like Mexico has a right to exist as a Mexican state, and Argentina as an Argentinian state. Nobody ever questions that. It's only us who get questioned. And now, it's happening in America. Let me give you another piece of my mind on this. I kept hearing, as a piece of rhetoric by this monster Al-Sayed, that one of the problems is that foreign agents, referring to AIPAC, are interfering in the elections. Let me tell you something, you mamzer. The money that AIPAC gets is from my pocket and your pocket. It's not a foreign actor. It's our own community exercising our right, like your community in Dearborn, Michigan, to tell the world what our rights are, to the exercise of democracy. So please don't be confused. And then, by the way, people like Bernie Sanders, whom, by the way, he wants to go into the gas chambers, let him be the first one to go. People like Bernie Sanders, let me tell you something. When they embrace him, who embraced Hassan Piker, who worships the terrorists who brought down the World Trade Center in New York, what are we thinking? We have a whole side of our politics now that is embracing this reality. And I have to tell you something. For all of those in this room who vote that way, including myself for many years, it's time to wake up. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. It's time to wake up because for us, peoplehood should be better and more important than our political affiliation. I am going to vote for whomever secures the destiny of my people. And that should be what we all do. I don't care how many fan mails I get, but this is a truth that needs to be spoken. We are very lucky here in Nevada that we have 2 U.S. senators that are impeccable when it comes to coming to the side of the state of Israel. But if we let our guard down, that will not be the case forever. Because let me remind you, Jews are coming to the side of this mamzer and embracing him. A friend of mine, by the way, who thought I was getting a little carried away, sent me the picture of the president of Mexico embracing the new representative of the Palestinian state that she just recognized. And I said, look, she's crazy. And that's why I live here, by the way. I want no part of that. But, and I do not say this lightly, the power of somebody like El Sayed, if he gets elected to the U.S. Senate, is infinitely more powerful than the power of the president of Mexico. I know I'm going to get fan mail for this too. But this is the truth. And for those of you who are telling me, well, it was just 12,000 votes, he will never win the election, let me remind you how many times we sat and said, oh, that guy will never win the election. Wake up, people. I do not care who Al Sayed's rival is. We have to support that person. And we have to get this monster out of American politics and away from trying to influence the destiny of our people. This is not a joke. This is now an emergency. The graves in Israel remind us why Israel became necessary. But the way we live our lives in Israel reminds us of why Israel must endure, of why it has to be here forever. After a man drove his truck into Temple, Israel in West Bloomfield, Michigan, and attempted to kill preschool children. Let me say that again. Attempted to kill preschool children because he drove his truck straight into the preschool. Al Sayed came out and condemned the attack and said, well, he was hurting because Israel killed his family members, who, by the way, were Hezbollah commandants. And so people who are hurting are going to hurt other people. And Jews defended him. And Jews said, look, he's condemning it. This is no longer about politics. This is about common sense. This is about humanity. This is about black and white, wrong and right, evil and goodness. Look, I think that I've said everything I could say to you about this. But the most important thing to remember is that our Torah portion this morning, and the Torah, by the way, speaks a universal, eternal language of truth, is that these little choices that apparently do not influence anything in life, 1 squad member, 2 squad members, 3 squad members, doesn't matter, it's only 3, eventually become a snowball and they bury us. Re'eh anochi noten livnechem hayom bracha uklala. I set before you a blessing and a curse. Do not be so entrenched in your ways and your ideas that you cannot muster to see life in a different way. It's time for us to wake up. Let me give you a powerful and painful example of what it means not to wake up. Oh, the Nazis will never do anything to us. We fought hand side by side with them in the First World War. So said the Jews wearing their medals as they walked into the gas chambers. Please, don't be so enamored of the story of our people in this country that we cannot distinguish calumny, lies, and a threat that is bigger than anything we faced here before. May God give us the courage to see clearly, to listen honestly, and to always choose a blessing. Shabbat Shalom.